University of Minnesota. He has a PhD in hydrology and watershed management, also from the university. He's been worked in many different places in the world as a Fulbright specialist, a visiting professor, and consultant. I've worked with Dr. Medner for about 15 years now, probably. And I know he's one of those persons that is very pragmatic. You know, when he goes out and works, he wants to make sure it's a product. He's also very concerned about our students at the University of Minnesota and has been a great mentor, providing opportunities for our students and experiential learning. And it's actually getting you both your hands and your feet dirty in the process. But with that, I'll turn it over to Joe for his presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Curran. Appreciate that. So the title has been changed a little bit, partially because yesterday I had an opportunity to sort of talk to a number of the students, and I realized that I needed to not spend so much time talking about fluvial mechanics, although we could easily spend the rest of the morning talking about that. I need to kind of talk about what's happening in terms of the field erosion down to the erosion that's taking place in the stream, and what that means then in terms of what kind of sediment ends up in the stream, how nutrients that might be in the upper part of the soil get translocated down to the stream and maybe into some ponds. I know right where we're staying in the hotel, I looked out and there's kind of a pond area there, but it looks kind of green. Well, where did that green come from? And so but basically I changed the title of the talk to kind of reflect really what is it that we can think about in terms of moving forward in doing some things in Nagaland that can improve the quality of life with respect to water. So Dr. Yu did a terrific job of explaining soil formation, soil loss, and so we can break that down to sheet, interrill, rill erosion. There's what's called the universal soil loss equation. We can begin to kind of quantify those things, but this is just near the surface. Obviously, in Nagaland, we got to deal with things like hill slope, which include groundwater, and how does groundwater and the shape of that landscape influence how erosion takes place. And of course, driving up here, saw a lot of geotechnical related issues where, again, if they don't quite get the cut of rock formation right, you've got material coming down. And I imagine during the monsoon season, probably a lot of activity in trying to clear rock off the road so you can get from point A to point B. But I'm going to focus more on really what's going on then down at the stream because, again, as Dr. Yu pointed out, if none of the sediment left the upland, guess what? It would take it out of the stream banks, and the stream banks would be eroding. So there's a balance, a natural balance in terms of sediment supply and sediment transport that occurs in nature. So I'm not going to go into all this here, but just suffice it to know that there are ways that we can look at slopes, whether it's a massive bluff that's going to collapse down on the road or a bank erosion that takes place. And it goes back into not only understanding the soil, but we're also trying to look at water content and saturation versus non-saturation, cohesive versus non-cohesive soil. So there's a number of things that kind of go into, you know, whether or not this thing's going to slide down. But our focus right now is on the stream. And what defines a stream? Well, it begins with energy. And do we have energy around here? Yeah, we have lots of energy around here because we have a lot of slope. And energy is the capability of doing work, which we turn that into power. And then ultimately we we put this together, we sort of define this in terms of stream power. What is the stream power that is basically capable of moving not only water but sediment, soil, if it gets translated into sediment, down from a higher gradient to a lower gradient? Because you see, if there is no slope, okay, we really don't have a stream. We call those pools. Or in Minnesota, which is the land of 10,000 plus lakes, we call those lakes. Okay, so there's no gradient there. So in order to have a stream, you have to have a gradient. And probably the best way to think about that is in this cartoon here, because this cartoon really describes the balance that occurs between flow and the resistance of flow, defining a stream. But we could also apply this to what Dr. Yu was talking about as well. We're back in the upland. We're looking at flow and what's the resistance of flow. Well, of course, some of the work that KC was working on, they were trying to figure out how do we resist flow and the transport of soil at a small scale. But as we change that scale now to a stream scale, or we can even go up to the Brahmaputra scale. Okay, these same sort of processes work across different scales from small to large. So to describe this a little bit more here, what we have over here is essentially our water supply or discharge, and we have our slope. Over here we have sediment size and sediment load. And so it's that we're looking at a balance between these two here, and that when the scale tips, so if we add more water here, for example, we change this arrow in this way here towards degradation. Now, I heard yesterday folks talk about climate change. One of the things that we see in the upper Midwest of the United States is an increased amount of water that's coming out of the sky. In other words, what that's changing is the water that's on this side. If this becomes more, it tips this arrow in this direction. Guess what that means for the stream? What that means for the upland? There's going to be more erosion, more pressure for erosion to occur, more stream bank erosion, more sediment that's going to be trying to be carved out of the stream that's going to get pushed further down. Now, by the same token, this arrow can switch in this direction here. But in order for that to happen, well, we'd have to see less water occur. Or we need to see some type of change over here. And the change over there would be that, let's say, we cut down all the trees in Nagaland. Now we don't have any vegetation on the upper landscape. Okay, if you don't have vegetation, if you don't have trees on the landscape, that means there's no water being pulled in by the roots and sent back up to the atmosphere through evapotranspiration. All that water would have to come off the landscape and would pick up more sediment. So if we increase the sediment supply, the sediment load, this arrow tips in this direction. Or in other words, at the bottom of the hill, we start seeing big piles and piles of sand and silt and that kind of material. So that's essentially what that looks like. So here's just kind of a picture of a stream in southeastern Minnesota after we had a very large rain event. And as a result, there was a lot of water that came out of the hills that carried with it rock. I mean, we're talking about pretty good sized cobble material. And then after it stopped raining, we lost our stream power. We don't have stream power, now we can't transport that stuff. And so what used to be all grass in here now was covered with rock. And so there was kind of a destruction going on of the stream. And actually, this is a trout stream, and so it was beginning to affect the habitat for trout. So again, we kind of come back to this scale. Another way of looking at this is sediment availability, where we got it this way, we've got deposition. And that's what I was just showing you with that picture, is what we were seeing excessive deposition because we didn't have transport human. So in this basically in this slide here, this kind of shows what happens with time. Okay, when you've got a landscape, we go back eons ago, before those streams were carved in Nagaland. Okay, we may have been somewhere up here where the stream sizes were relatively small. But with time and with more people populating the landscape, with human activity, okay, the channel can begin to enlarge and over both down cutting and widening. And so our valleys are basically carved out that way over time. But there's a certain point where if you get too wide here, now we don't have the stream power, okay, to move all that material. And so it begins to sort of fill up on the bed here. Okay, so this is just to kind of go back to this picture. This is what was happening here. We didn't have the stream power to move all this material. So now we're building material on the valley floor, on the stream bed. And this is kind of what happens then, is that depending on changes in the climate or changes in the land use, this whole process essentially can go through all these cycles. Maybe not all these cycles. Maybe we don't do down cut, but at some there's maybe some widening that takes place. But kind of going through these cycles here that basically change the shape and the form and the characteristics of those streams. And so if a stream is really beat up and it has too much material, something like this, where the slope is too steep, material's falling, that's not very appealing if you want to go swimming in that water, because now it maybe looks kind of brown. Or if it's got nutrients, it may turn green. Or you just may not even have a pool to swim in because all that sediment's filled up the pool. And so from a human and both from a fish perspective, an unstable stream is not something that's all that desirable. And so what we really want to have is the desirable characteristics of both being able to swim and fish in that water resource. And so we want to get back to, we can't go back to here again. Okay, we're not, all that material has been moved towards the ocean. But what we can get back to is a sort of quasi-stability that can then improve the quality of life. So here's just an example again of the relationship between velocity and sediment transport. This used to be a wood bridge here that was about only this wide. Got blown out. We got too much water coming through. Was it climate change, land use? I don't necessarily know what it was. But the engineers kind of came in, they said, we don't want to see that happen again, so we're going to make a 3-box culvert so that we got plenty of electricity to get water through. Well, if you slow the water down too much, the sand and the gravel falls out and it starts to just plug up the culverts here. So it's important to get this right. Because again, we're not just moving water, we've got to move sand and gravel too. So we can put this into equations related. I'm just simplifying stream power down to the relationship of velocity versus slope. Okay, there's a lot more complex mathematics that go into this. What I'm simply showing on the slide here is, as you look here, this is sand. Okay, in order to get sand on the bottom, you have to have a slower velocity, a flatter slope. And this is essentially a trapezoidal type channel, and you can look up here and you can see, okay, that's pretty wide here. Okay, there's not the kind of stream that's necessary to move larger particles. But here's essentially that same stream, but turning around the corner, and now we've gone from sand to gravel. Well, what was the difference? The difference is that we changed the dimensions of the channel. our width to depth ratio now is much smaller, which means under low flow conditions, we have the velocity to keep moving the sand particles downstream. So what does that leave behind? It leaves gravel. Why is gravel important? Because gravel is critical for fishes to be able to spawn. And if they can spawn, then we can have a sustainable fish population in a stream channel like this. So is there a relationship between channel form and drainage area? And again, as Dr. Yu was pointing out, with regards to things related to soil erosion, the answer is yes. Worldwide, we know that the combination of climate and geology and land use, put those all together for a given drainage area, contributing drainage area, we have some very good relationships. And we can quantify that in terms of what's called a regional hydraulic geometry curve. And again, this is the relationship between drainage area and cross-sectional area. Now, why is this important? It's important because if we want to restore a stream in Nagaland, we need to know what kind of cross-sectional area is going to correspond to the drainage area that's feeding it. We want to know is the slope of this, and this is on a log scale, we want to know if this slope going to be steeper or flatter. It's probably going to be a little bit steeper than it is, because this is a curve from Minnesota. And when we do restoration work, what we want to do is we want to mimic, in a sense, we want to mimic what occurs in natural systems. And so we go out and we look at natural systems, and that's how we gather these data points here that then inform us on how it is that we can come back and take a disturbed channel and recreate or restore the functions that are important for humans and fish. So in Minnesota, we've had some big storms in the last decade or two. The thing is that we don't know how to answer this question just yet. You can see this playground here isn't so much fun for the kids to go play on anymore. The playground equipment kind of got ripped out. And there's an agricultural building, but well, we had too much water come through here with too much stream power. So we had that, we go back to our scale again, we had degradation going on big time. And the degradation basically took out this area, this riparian area. This would have been the active floodplain is probably down here lower, but this is a terrace. But water got up high enough here to the point where it impacted this farming operation. And so one of the things that Dr. Singh is going to talk about is data collection. We've got to understand more about how much precipitation is occurring, when it's occurring, what's its magnitude, okay, what's its duration and intensity. Because that's important information for us to understand whether we're going to see climate change that's going to cause erosion effects, shown as in this picture. So stream stability, it's the ability of the stream to maintain over time its dimension, pattern, and profile. So that the channel neither aggrades nor degrades. Again, that's back to that balance system. If we have too much degradation, okay, things are getting too wide too fast, and we lose the function. If it fills up with too much sediment, well, that doesn't make for a very good habitat for fish. So stream stability is also the ability to transport without adverse effect the flows and detritus. Okay, that's the material that's in the watershed that Dr. Yu was referring to earlier. And we want to be able to have habitat. Now I realize there's more problems related to fish in Nagaland than just good habitat. But this is a part of the equation for getting some of the biological integrity back into Nagaland streams. So one of the things I want to switch a little bit more to water quality now, based on some conversations I had yesterday, and I want to just point out that the kinds of things I'm going to talk about now are really off channel. So remember I talked about a stream and stream power. Well, if you have a lake or kind of a wet area, holding area, there's no stream power there. And part of why we want to come off stream is that if you build a dam, what does the dam do over time? It captures sediment. Silt and sand kind of fills up. So that becomes a maintenance problem down the road. So if we can take some of that water off channel and treat it off channel, that's really kind of what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about building a dam and building a pond, because that can fill up with sediment over time. And so in Minnesota, I've been working with a company called Midwest Floating Island. And the idea behind this is that we use plants. Okay, when I was talking to the botany students yesterday, they're wondering, well, what do I do with the botany degree? Well, how can I utilize plants? And I began to think, well, we can take some of those plants and we can put them in islands that provide water quality treatment. Now, a floating island isn't going to deal with excess gravel and aggradation, but it can deal with some of the fine silt-sized particles that can come off the upper part of the landscape. And so the way we've done it in Minnesota, and this, by the way, this is an affiliate of a company called Biohaven, which is essentially worldwide, is that we kind of created a matrix, a platform here of recycled plastic bottles. So we've been drinking water out of these little bottles here. Well, when you're done with these, where do these things go? Do they get thrown in the ravine? Or can we put these back to use again? Can we reuse these things? And the answer is yeah, we sure can. We can make some good use out of that. And this is sort of the matrix that gets put together. So the floating island has the potential to reduce both fine sediment and nutrient pollution. Basically, it's competing with and pulling in algae that presents some of the algal blooms. It's providing some biocomplexity and habitat for even small mammals and turtles and things like that. So what makes these things work? Basically, in this schematic here, we break this down. So we've got our plants growing up here. Here's our matrix of recycled plastic bottles. And we got roots that are growing through this matrix. But what's really going on here is we're developing a biofilm that allows for periphyton growth to take place on not only the roots, but on the matrix here. And so with these microbes and the formation of this biofilm, we've got microbial activity. In other words, the whole idea of the recycled plastic bottles is we were building habitat for plants and for microbes. And those microbes are essentially functioning like a wastewater treatment plant. And these microbes need a surface area to reproduce. And with time, this little sticky film, this biofilm, can grow and expand. And so it's really then becomes a complex, comprehensive microbiological community that's able to not only do biological removal, but keep algal blooms down to the point where the water now is a little bit more desirable to jump into. Instead of jumping into green water, these systems can really clean up that water. And so part of the challenge, part of the things that we've been researching is, well, what's the right combination? Is it bigger islands, smaller islands? And really, it kind of comes down to the amount of surface area that we create. The more surface area we create by having more smaller islands with more plants growth, we get better treatment. You'll notice here, there's aeration going on. If we can do aeration of the water, we can get even better treatment. And so the dirtier the water is, the more that we want to have something like aeration that sort of move the water around and increase the contact time with these floating islands. So here's just kind of a floating island building up, and you can kind of see the roots that are growing down underneath here. And again, we can't have a lot of stream power. We can't have water rushing through here. We've got to have quiescent water. You need to have a certain amount of hydraulic resonance time for the water to come in contact with the periphyte and for the biofilm, microorganisms to do their job. So again, here's just looking at the root structure. So obviously, botanists, we can't use any plant here. What kind of plants do we have to have growing here? Anybody want any botanists out there want to volunteer? What kind of plant do we need to have growing here? Doesn't matter anywhere. Anywhere you gotta have a plant root that can handle water. Okay, we can if you put there's some plants you can put onto this that wouldn't do very good because their roots don't want to be in complete saturation all the time. Okay, so plants that love water, that can put their roots down in water, are absolutely critical. So again, this is what we're talking about here. Recycled plastic bottles. I've already talked about that. I'm not going to spend any more time on that. How are islands made? Okay, all the botanists that are sitting back there, you're getting your master's degree in botany. I need a whole army to kind of go out and put plants into that matrix and launch these things. A couple years ago, I had about 25 students. And it took us a day, but we planted probably about 2,000 plants and launched 16 islands on Fleming Lake. And again, you can see this is a lot of hard work up front getting this in here. But once we got it in there, for the most part it worked. We ran into some yeast problems, but here again are some of the aquatic plants that we use. Now, I don't know if we can necessarily use these same plants in Nagaland. Okay, botanists will be able to tell me what is the right plant we need to be using. But plants are a big part of it. We also have to sometimes anchor these things down, especially in a bigger water body, because we don't want this thing moving around all over the place. And again, we need to have a water body that's not moving up and down all the time. If this water level gets too low, guess what the roots are going to do? They're going to start to go down into the sediment of the lake or wetland. And then if the water gets back up, the roots get torn off. Okay, so how well does this work? We talk about total suspended solids. This was work that was done in Montana, but whether it's total suspended solids or really look at chemical oxygen demand, total phosphorus, total nitrogen. Now here we're looking at metals like copper, lead, zinc, oil, and grease. Here's our removal rates. The system works. And again, the dirtier the water, the better it works. Probably our poorest performance here was with total nitrogen, but that's because, again, there's a different redox chemistry that works better with dealing with nitrate. I could show you several other slides here of different systems and different kinds of environments, but the bottom line, even in relatively clean water, we can still get some reductions of these pollutants. But as I look around Nagaland, I'm thinking, we probably have some pretty high concentrations of total suspended solids finding their way from upland and downland. I mean, I don't know about the nutrients so much, but I do think we can make a dent in some of the total suspended solids in Nagoland by putting in some floating islands. And again, we're also creating some fish habitat. There's just a beautification and enhancement that can kind of go along with some of these bioremediation tools. So in summary, we're looking at effectively trying to remove these kinds of pollutants, creating habitat and trying to increase aquatic biodiversity now. I don't think I haven't heard anybody talk about aquatic biodiversity. So this might be one of the ways to do it. The flotation avoids issues with plants drying out and flooding. Now there may be some other animals that can come in and again, like I said, we had problems with geese that came in and plucked some of our plants out because they love the island so much they wanted to make it their home. And so it's a way to put a best management practice out there that is not requiring a lot of concrete or building a wastewater treatment plant. In a sense, building a wastewater treatment plant, but we're building it pretty cheaply, pretty effectively. So these represent sort of the kind of the benefits of looking at that. So I think I have a little time left. Okay. I'm sure you all have a lot of questions on it, unless you thought this was as clear as mud. I guess you must not have any questions. Oh, come on now. Botanist back there. Surely you got a question. What's the best, what are the best aquatic plants we should be using? All right, Dr. Singh.
In the higher sloping situation with smaller streams, how can you deploy this technology? Instead of going to the stream check.
Okay, everybody hear Dr. Singh's question? He's talking about the fact that we've got a lot of slope. Where the heck are you going to put something like this? Well, at least my observation in Missouri, I haven't had enough time to look around Nagoland, but there are places where things flatten out. And where they flatten out, guess what? That's where you divert some of that stream water into that flat area, and you can't treat all the water, but you can treat some of the water and let it go back down to the stream.
For that, one of the practice is check them.
Right.
So those check them based on the sloping. You can clear check them where you have at least this little flat area where the water can slow down, and that's where you can have the
Right. So I talked to some of the geology students this morning. Any geology students in here? Not. Okay, geology students. This is where you need to step up, and as you look at the landscape, where in the landscape can we put stuff like this? Okay. Eventually, we need to have, as Dr. Yu pointed out, we need to have more data on slope and soils so that we can figure out where the best places to do restoration work. Yes.
What is the media? Do you use soil or just what?
No, it's recycled plastic bottles. The media of the floating island was recycled plastic bottles, and the plant roots grow through that.
We use aquatic plants for example, water acid.
Mm-hmm.
Then, why we need this plastic?
Well, you wouldn't necessarily have to do that. I mean, we could. This is what the company decided to use because they felt like, hey, can we keep some of these plastic bottles from going to a landfill? And that's what they came up with. But theoretically, I think if we were to do this work in Nagoland, I think what I'd want to do is some type of have Dr. Curran do a market analysis and figure out what's the most available and best material we could use to regrow the plants in. Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Does that proper man look like Prime Minister Modi? Let's do it one time. Let's do it one time.
Thank you, Dr. Magner. Interesting work and good to bring the students in too. So our next speaker is Dr. Afyar Rahman from Bangladesh. He's an expert in agroforestry, climatology, sustainable agriculture, and land use design. He's a professor in the Department of Agroforestry and Environment, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujbar, Lakman Agricultural University in Bangladesh. I probably pronounced that wrong. But he did a PhD and a postdoc at Kyushu University in Japan. His specialization is tree crop interactions in agroforestry systems, homestead production systems, climate smart agriculture, ecology, biodiversity, and climate change, and organic farming. A lot of things we've been discussing over the last couple of days. He also has written a book entitled The Deforestation of Teknaf Peninsula of Bangladesh, a study of political ecology. I had the pleasure of being able to review that book, and it's really an impressive example of how you look at this Teknaf Peninsula, in this case, the agroecology in a very integrated way, very well done, and I think a great resource for the future. With that, I'll ask Javier to present.
Thank you, Professor Jin, Honorable Chair, respected professors from India, US, and distinguished participants, my dear students. Welcome all of you to the presentation. The title is Multi-Story Agroforestry System for Higher Production and Benefit, and upon a study in the tree ecosystem of Bangladesh. And here, me and my co-workers. And before going to my main content, I want to just introduce Bangladesh. I think most of you know. The area is about 144,000 square kilometer. Population is quite high, 162 million. Its density more than 1,000 people per square kilometer. And the income, annual per capita income, we are increasing the last couple of years, 5 or 10 years. And poverty rate decreasing, but still it's significant, 24.3%. And primary school enrollment is 98%, more than 98%, and 72% literacy. And we're going. So this is the introduction. I think you all know about agroforestry. Agroforestry is a sustainable land use system that integrates tree, crop, and sometimes animal livestock, and increases the overall production. And trees are growing in the crop field, not only crop field, in other areas simultaneously or sequentially. And agroforestry was first started in Africa to reduce the soil erosion. But nowadays we call soil conservation. Soil conservation means the reduce of soil erosion at the same time maintain the soil fertility. So these two are very important for soil conservation. That is, we need to reduce the soil erosion and maintain the soil fertility. So agroforestry is a very good tool that conserves soil fertility and soil properties. And why we need agroforestry? Actually, country like Bangladesh, where forest land is very low, less than about 10%, according to FAO statistics, and the population density is very high, so there is no enough space to grow plant trees. So we can plant trees in the available land, that is cropland or some marginal land or homestead, something like that, across the roadsides. So that is why agroforestry is a very time demanding, but it's a traditional one. I think it is a subcontinent, but as a science, it's very new. It doesn't mean that growing trees in the crop field is agroforestry. We must think about the compatibility between the trees and crops and also the objectives. What is our objective? If our objective is to improve the soil fertility, then we need to select one type of species. If we want to improve the socio-economic condition of the farmers, then we need to select another species. And in Bangladesh, we have very few, about 8% trees ecosystem. That is, some part are very slightly sloped, and some are very lowland. And here, the jackfruit tree, I think in this area also, we can find a lot of jackfruit trees. So jackfruit is naturally grown in that area. But problem is farmers is sporadically they don't maintain any specific spacing, and then very sporadically they grow some vegetables. Our thinking was whether we can transform these orchards to multi-story agroforestry system. That means we kept agroforestry jackfruit tree at the top story. Because if we just cut again to plant the jackfruit tree, it may take 10 to 15 years to get the fruit. That is why we kept it naturally. Then we introduced two crops as middle story and lower story. And then microclimatic modification in agroforestry system. This is a very good way we can maintain the microclimatic modification. However, still light is a very limiting factor is there because but all light, light quality and light quantity both are important. So if we select those species or those vegetables that shade loving, then we can grow as a street crop and farmers can get benefit. Okay. So some few works actually from my department we've already done, and this concept actually was introduced in 2010. The multi-story agriculture system in Bangladesh by me and Hussein. And later on, me and our other professors, we did some research in that area, how we can improve the system. And our research questions, actually, this is my findings is a project work. It is funded by World Bank through Bangladesh Agriculture Research Council. Some of the findings I am presenting here. So our research questions was, is it possible to transform jackfruit or tree orchard to multi-story agroforestry system by introducing middle and lower story crops for increasing diverse products? Of course, because jackfruit is there, so if we get more products from that system, it will have immense value. And does multi-story agroforestry system increase economic and land use benefit over conventional farming? And how farmers can get ecosystem services in terms of microclimatic modifications and system dynamics? And this is Bangladesh and central region, and I think this is very close to Manipur here. And two upazilas we selected, that is sub-districts. And then the time was we conducted this research on 2017 to 2018. And the climate and weather is during the winter 18 to 24.7 degrees Celsius, quite comfortable temperature. And during summer 26 to 30 degrees Celsius. And rainfall is heavy during monsoon, that means monsoon season, about 80% rainfall occurs during this time, but others time we experience dry season. And relative humidity also to 72 to 74%, and there are some soil characteristics. And what we did, this was just orchard, and we surveyed the orchard, and farmers actually they don't grow much crops here. Then we transformed into this system and cultivate this plow, and then here we just this system grow vegetables inside. And here also papaya as middle story. So this total system is that as top story jackfruit, middle story we introduce papaya, and in the lower story jackfruit also we grow arrowhead, turmeric, and ginger here. because turmeric and ginger, it is said that they are very shade loving crops. So we wanted to see how much they can tolerate the shade. And that the experiment was conducted. This is the design, and there was no specific spacing for the jackfruit trees, but for cabbage and 60 centimeter by 60 centimeter, this is recommended actually, and for papaya 1.5 meter. And we used the new variety. With our university, we released a very new papaya variety, is gynoecious, because there is very problem of papaya. You know, the male female the ratio is very different, but that variety is very interesting. That is gynoecious, and about 90% plants they can give the fruits. This is the big deal. That is why we use that variety. And some parameters we collected, and some microclimatic data, light intensity, the photosynthetic active radiation, soil moisture, temperature, and litter fall under jackfruit tree, because the diacetyl seems semi. It's not deciduous, but semi-deciduous. So litter fall, and we collected how much litter fall we can get from a tree. And we also calculated some soil properties, that is soil fertility, soil pH, total nitrogen. So this soil is especially acidic soil, not truly acidic, but pH is around 5 to 4, 4 to 5.5. That is why we think that the soil pH is very important, and we analyze how this litter fall can change the soil properties. And organic carbon and organic matter, and we also analyze this benefit cost ratio, how much farmers are expending and how much they are getting, and also land equivalent ratio, that is land use. Here are some equations and combination. Okay, then some major findings. For Arrowhead, actually we saw that in agroforestry system, the 33% yield we lost due to the competition between trees and crops. Competition not only for light, competition for water and nutrients as well. And here is some pictorial view. And then for cabbage, is significantly reduce the yield when we grow under tree. And at the different distance from the tree base, it's 4 meter distance from the tree base, that is 7% yield loss we export. And here is some. Then for ginger, it is interestingly that at the partial shade, ginger yield very nice. That is 34% more yield we got when it grows under shade. This is very good information, and it's significantly higher than even open field. That's so ginger cultivation. Here's some pictures, and for the turmeric, it also loves shade, and for the 4 meter from the tree base, 15 or around 16% yield we can increase. Yeah. And here is some pictorial view of turmeric. And for papaya, actually, number of fruits and single fruit weight and yield reduced by 23.18% in agroforestry system. Then sold papaya. But jackfruit, interestingly, it also gave high yield, about 29.85%, 30% yield we can get more yield. Why? Because we applied water nutrient for the crops. Farmers they don't apply any water nutrient for the jackfruit tree. This is very traditional one. But since we applied water and nutrient in our agricultural crops, some part also enjoyed by this tree, and partially it is managed. That is why this use increment we found here. Then, if we look at the benefit cost, that is jackfruit, papaya, and cabbage, the whole system, the benefit cost ratio is 5.1, and for sole papaya still is good, 3.92, and sole cabbage 3.9. But land equivalent ratio was 2.37. What does it mean? It means that if we want to get same amount of production, we need 2.3 times land for sole cropping. That is, agroforestry is a very good tool for land use perspective. Okay. 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 This is a very good information for agroforestry. 2 points. One is nutrient pumping and nutrient cycling. What we can find in agriculture farming. That means monocropping. Why it happened? Because some leaf is shaded into the soil and incorporated into the soil and goes into the down. Then root system it uptakes the nutrients again and it again goes to the top and again fall to the soil. This is the cycling. Very good. But in agriculture crop we see we just transplant and sow seeds and harvest. Then again every year we need to give input and harvest. So in that point of view, we call agriculture or just traditional farming is open system, but agroforestry is a closed system, and agroforestry is in between these two. Because if we practice agroforestry from our land use, we can get more benefits. And nutrient pumping, when we grow, for example, rice, a lot of water and nutrients it leaks down. It cannot be used. But tea, the root system, it goes even seasonal. So they can uptake this water and nutrient that was leaked down. So in that point of view, this nutrient cycling and nutrient pumping is very beneficial for this type of land use system. And then I think okay. Then the yield reduction of papaya, that is the in conclusion. Okay. The yield reduction of papaya and cabbage are at 23.18% and 44.49% in agroforestry practice as compared to the open condition. Yield of jackfruit was significantly increased by about 30% in agroforestry system. Then sole cropping. That is like when we integrated all the productions from different components, that is from jackfruit, papaya, and vegetables or crops, then the overall production increased. That is why we got the higher yield and yield ratio. But light is the main limiting factor. 30.2% light was available. That is why we experienced a significantly lower yield of cabbage and papaya. And chemical properties of soil. That is, I think some slides are missing here. If you can repeat it. We found that soil total nitrogen, organic carbon, and organic matter was exhibited of positive changes in the soil fertility after experimentation. Even it's a 1 year experiment, but I think we need more experimentation on it. And the highest benefit cost ratio was 5.1, and the equal ratio was 2.37. And this indicates positive opportunity for diversification, high income, and nutritional security, employment, and ecosystem services from multi-story agroforestry systems, which ultimately would improve the livelihood of the farmers and enhance maximum utilization of the land in the TS ecosystem. And the one thing I want to mention here that nowadays there are many fruit orchards are being developed. Even rice field they are transforming into the fruit orchard to get more benefit because rice farming nowadays in Bangladesh is not so much beneficial. But they grow rice for their own subsistence or own food. But from economic point of view, they are developing these orchards. So these orchards we can bring under agroforestry practices, especially during the early stage, about 5 years, they can grow this type of vegetables and get more benefit. And that these fruit species are now very high yielding varieties and dwarf in nature, so they can grow very easily vegetables and other crops and unused crops. And there is some activities of our data collection. Two of my students did masters under this project, and BS Agriculture third year students they visited this field, and we had also a field day and introduced this technique to the other farmers. And we did some also management practices for jackfruit tree. This is a very severe problem now. There is trunk borer in jackfruit in that area, and farmers actually they don't pay much attention. But we manage this disease. That is why maybe the production of jackfruit was increased tremendously. And here we measured how much liter fall is coming every month, and we analyze this and use some it act as mulches. When the leaves are in the ground, mulches, and we also can get some fuel from that system. So as a whole, agroforestry system can be practiced in that area. Thank you very much for your precious. Do you have any questions? Yeah.
What was the method we used for estimating the cost benefit ratio?
Oh, it's just simple, very simple. I'm not an economist. Just total gross benefit and gross cost of the system. But for it is for the why in that system the PCR was very high. For jackfruit, actually no cost. But when we grow cabbage or papaya, there is some cost, labor cost, input cost. That is why the benefit cost ratio is different from different systems. Sure.
For growing this turmeric, you said turmeric for like we need to maintain 4 centimeter, right?
Yeah.
So like, is there any possible that like turmeric has a character like to change the color when they grow in a steady place? So will it be like a possible like if we grow in a 4 distance of the same, so like will that color still remain the same?
Okay. This 4 meter, not centimeter. This 4 meter is not unique because our plot size is in research. Our plot size will measure that. Okay, after 5 meter later, 5 meter distance, maybe there is no difference, or it may give more results. But for turmeric and ginger, it's a shade like even pineapple, it's a shade level. But when we grow it in the open field, then maybe the quality will be very good. But the yield may decrease because when full sunshine to the leaf, then maybe some leaf burn or something like that. I'm not sure the mechanism, but maybe it may happen. But still, it's a very good shade-loving crop. And when you grow, when you grow in agroforestry or in the organic point of view, agroforestry itself, we also always recommend just use less input, less fertilizer, less pesticide. In that point of view, maybe it will have very good quality.
You got that greater production with this agricultural system, but that could also translate into use of more nutrients in the soil. So do you expect that those plots would have to be fertilized in the future? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, actually, in agroforestry, 1 year experimentation is not enough for this. And for jackfruit leaves are very hard because leaf quality is important when we consider about the soil nutrient improvement. That this jackfruit leaf is high lignin and polyphenol content. That means it decomposes very slowly. But some species, if we select or in between, if we just if the soil fertility is a very big concern, then we can introduce some fertilizer tree in between and cut it very heavily, and that crude material we can incorporate into the soil. If there is no other sources of organic matter, for example, compost is not available, and cow population is decreasing, then we can use this type of thing to improve the soil fertility, and it will improve the soil system dynamics.
Dr. Raman, so
Yeah.
you mentioned about borers in jackfruit.
Yeah,
What is the treatment for that?
jackfruit.
Borers.
Oh, boron. Actually, we use paste. You know, the paste. We just one entomologist. We went to him that this is a very big problem. Then he suggested. But still, I think the next time we will propose this that how we can manage this boron problem. Now this is a very severe problem in Bangladesh.
Like, can this technique be applied in rubber plantation also? Because what I've heard is that rubber trees, the roots doesn't go down, it goes just on the surface.
Okay, yeah, rubber, coffee, sometimes we go also. I know you doing a Barbies grape. Barbies grape is a fruit. Forgot the scientific name. We call it lotcon in our country. I don't know. This is a shade level, but it's a huge. In Trump, you can find many fruits. And it's costly. It's costly. So maybe 1 kg, even in India, maybe 100, more than 100 rupee. So it's that type of shade loving, even tree, we can introduce. And another point, turmeric and ginger, it has another characteristics. It's a repellent. If you grow that turmeric and ginger in between the trees, then insect attack and pest attack will be reduced. So you can get another benefit from that system. If possible.
So, in agroforest, do you often look at how the nutrients are pulled up by the trees from the deep subsurface, and then
Recycle.
the soil surface to the biomass, and how that transfer occurs in the year?
Okay, okay, thank you. Actually, for this experiment, soil fertility was not our objective. But some other experiments, in the northern part of Bangladesh, we have experienced a lot of eucalyptus trees are introduced, especially in the rice field. And our objective, when we find the soil problem, soil health problem, we have another experimentation in our university that is allicropping with Glycidia sepia. It's a legume tree. It's a very fast growing. And it can, with this tree, even if you put very heavy. And we incorporated all the food metals into the soil. And after 5 years, not 5, after 3 years, we saw that 50% nitrogen we can save for rice farming, even for rice farming. So in that experiment, we analyzed how much we cut and what is the nutrient content and how much we are adding to the soil and how much water plants are being uptaken and it's happening. But still, it's very important and because below ground it's the dark side. It's very difficult to analyze all the parameters. I think next time. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rockman, for an excellent presentation. Our last presenter today will be Dr. Yu again. He has graciously agreed to present a paper that Dr. Carlin Ekman, who couldn't be here, had planned to. So I've already introduced him once. I don't need to do that again. So I'll invite you to come up.
Okay, so I'm here to present not my work, but Karen Egman's work. And she really wanted to come here, but with her, family matters, and so she was very injured on her hamstring. So even though she really wanted to join us, she couldn't come. And also Tapui, she also has, she has to be with her family during this spring, so she couldn't join. And also, Dr. Curran is busy with running the whole program. So when I saw the list of the authors, I volunteered to take the presentation over. So this is going to be relatively short talks, but I will try to, and I can read what Karen wrote, but I can't really feel between the lines with intentions that Karen wanted to have this presentation. So this is what I'm going to do. So I will feature those presentations as much as I can, as Karen put down. I would not be shy. I will not be shy from filling the gaps with my own thoughts and my observations. And I would also welcome, if you can join us and then adding within the lines, that would be great. So this is mostly about the research needs and the priorities. And this is kind of recapping the discussions we have been having all around the world. So the presentation outline is first provide a little bit of background and the context. But then you will find that this is somewhat overlapping with what Dr. Cohen presented at the beginning of this. And then I'll talk a little bit about our team, the UN team, and the process, and then the research needs and the priorities that have been identified during the previous symposiums. And hopefully, along the way, I will invite your discussions in the presentation. So you can always jump in the middle of my talk and yourself. So the context. So there is a concern that there is not enough funding to support applied research at universities and the colleges. And also, but the truth is that the research done by applied scientists will make huge impacts on the policies and the programs. But at the same time, the research done by applied scientists will provide us how and why some policies work and some policies don't. So that's the kind of context. But then, when you look at this list, then you need to be careful about what we mean by applied research, because often the boundary between applied research and the basic research is quite hazy. And then, so my strategy would be not alienating the basic scientists, but rather give them good questions that they can make meaningful contributions. For example, the understanding how river works and how rivers make their floodplains, how rivers cut down into the rocks, and how rivers interact with the landscapes. Well, those are relatively basic geological questions. But then the work they do can be coordinated with applied scientists who are interested in controlling erosion of the soils and also in the streams. And also, as Dr. Margino showed, there are also many ways that the chemists and the biological scientists can contribute. So there is a need to really invite the basic scientists to be involved in the applied science, and also we should be really open on both sides to the other side, the other parts of the science. And also, this lack of funding is somewhat related to our collaborations with government and the public sectors, because fundings, when you look for fundings, probably the best strategy is to have more options than fewer options. So as we network with the government and also as we network with international communities, who also share the same problems that we have, the same desires to solve those problems. So the chances that the baseline and the chances that the core of the money that becomes available to us to do the work needed will increase. So, and also the research, as mentioned here, research also help people know whether the policies and programs are effective. So research actually provides evaluation of the policy. So what that also implies is that applied science, where they are, if you are in the community of the universities, then they need to establish themselves as an objective body of the knowledge. So they need to be clear about the conflict of interest in stepping into the public policies. So we really need the data, and they are produced by applied scientists with a clear goal that the resulting data will help form the policies, but also evaluate some actions of the policies. So we need the data, but the truth is the data is expensive. The data is expensive in money and also labor, and also data collections requires coordination, not just among the individuals, but also between the institutions in different countries. So those are the all things that we need to pay attention to provide the data. And also there is one important thing that we need to think about. So even if you have resources and networks, it often takes time until you get the data. So what meaningful things can you do while you're waiting? So there are a number of things we can deal with such situations. For example, some data collection is awfully expensive. They require expensive laboratory equipment and field equipment. But often, the data that are going to be collected with those expensive methods can be also collected in low cost as well. There are many ways that you can collect the data that could replace this expensive data. But those data collection requires much less money and much less effort. So those data collection techniques that require less money and less effort, but are effective in your field, and those need to be paid attention to. So big data gaps. But I also see that there have been quite a big progress since the last symposium. When I read the products from the previous two symposiums, so I had some expectations about this particular symposium as well. But then I was really energized by seeing the new data coming out, the new data that have been produced since 2016, which is only two and a half years ago. So that's quite a big progress. For example, Dr. Say, and she, correct me if I'm pronouncing your name wrong. Yeah. So she has done really impressive, GIS analysis on the gym cycles. So she basically calculated, how much of the lands are being used for a gym, and whether that area of the land has changed over the last decade. So this is the data that she produced. It's actually really contribute to filling this gap, the history gap. So we need more of those work to fill in this lack of history data on gym production. The second, the lack of data on functioning of local markets, including labor markets. And maybe, Dean, you have any comments to add on that point?
It just that we had started some work on value chain.
Yeah.
That we a little bit.
So there is also progress. And the third point is very little data on hydrologic patterns, rainfall, flooding, sediments, and pollution, or other water-related dimensions. And you see a lot of words there. But if I can regroup them, so you basically need a basic climate data, and you also need soil erosion data, and you also need some data about rivers and the streams. So it basically talks about the data about the source and water. But when we kind of reflect on the presentations yesterday and Dr. John and also KC from Middle University. They began to produce some erosion data from their plot scale experiment on the June cycle. So that is also very promising because they contribute to filling this gap as well. So the not much independent evaluation of policies and the programs. And this is something that I think we need to work on. And I see a lot of discussions about how the university and the government and the farmers can help each other in a more efficient way, and also in a constructive way. And then I keep hearing that it has been quite rare that all those government and higher education bodies come together on a single meeting and then have a face-to-face conversation. So that I hope will lead to this type of interactions. So the governments will benefit by strengthening the university researchers because whatever governments do can depend on independent evaluation done by the independent researchers. So they can use this as a way to get more credit for what they did, and also they can use this service from the university to improve their policies. But at the same time, publics can hold the government more accountable. So no data, so what? And we talked a little bit about this because there will be a gap between now and until we have tons of the data. And then during that time, what we can do, how we can replace expensive measurement with relatively medium tech and the low cost method. That's something we can do. And how to evaluate impacts of policies, plans, and programs without good data. So that actually restates the first message. We can't really manage what we can measure. So we need to have the good feedback between the policy and the science and the field data. So data can be the evidence of product success and or failure, and also data can be used as a benchmark for the progress of the policies. And so that could be producing data can be used as we can see the data production as the way to hold the government accountable, but at the same time, the government can approach the data collection as a way to validate the effectiveness of the work and as a way to improve their policies. So there is an urgent need for applied research and studies that obtain data to support natural resources management. And then that applied is important because that in a given situation we have, and we have to be really mindful about stakeholders and who are directly affected by the land and the natural resources management. So that's what we like to mean by applied science. But at the same time, we could be inviting to people who do basic research because we will need them as well. The team and activities, the continuing conversations began in 2015 between Mizoram University and Kogina Science College, FAO, and University of Minnesota, and the District Water Management Organizations and others. 2014. So it's been only 4.5 years. So I'm actually very impressed by the progresses that you guys have made over the last 4.5 years. The joke is that university operates at the glacier rate. It's very slow processes. So the amount of the work that you have produced over the 4.5 years is quite impressive. So second, collaboration and various research activities and data collection. So my colleagues, do you know what CAT studies mean? Knowledge, attitude, and practice. And the value chain analysis, and the farming system of research, and seasonal challenges, etc. So again, the collaboration is very important because the collaboration in some way is the same word with the prioritization, because when you lack resources, then you have to pick the problems that you can collaborate so that you can really maximize your time and effort and resources. So this works. The big collaborations are happening in the key areas, and collaborations, international symposia, and we're having the third one now, and the training activities. So Dr. Margner and Dr. Singh and Dr. Andy Jenkins will have a training session at Dimapur and right after this symposium. So they will, provide the training about hydrological data collections and also operating drones to collect GIS data. So I hope you can participate on those trainings. And so the training is a really important part of the data collection. And it's a pavement for the data collection because you really like to be, meticulous about the data collection, because the protocol you are going to do data collection will be long effective. And also, if you abide by those protocols that are accepted by international communities, then your data can be published. And then people outside of Nagaland can use your data, and which will make your data more powerful. So I hope that when you go out to data collection, then there is always good training before those data collections in a way that you can ensure the quality of the data that you are collecting. So our process so far, this is the same, and I know the SAMA has been distributing this paper, because if you're like me, you can't read in your. Let's see, there have been a number of schemes for research direction that were sorted out in 2014 symposium in the University and the University. And the themes usually cover both human dimensions and natural dimensions. But at the same time, those themes are very mindful about internal dynamics within the natural systems and also internal dynamics within the social systems. And I also like those themes because it also pays attention to how these natural systems and social systems with their own internal dynamics interact and make feedback to each other. So I'm not going to read this whole thing because you have paper and read it. And there's also research needs identified in 2016. But then I see that it has become more specialized. So it's a good thing because in 2000 research directions are more in the high level. But in 2016, it came down to a specific topics with more specific research questions. And then, given the work that you guys did over the last 2 years, I begin to see that we are materializing some of the responses to these questions. So, in summing up, so entire Himalayan and Southeastern Asia Asian region is poised at the crossroads. And the population growth and demographic change. So I hear that the Netherlands population is doubling in every 20 to 30 years. It's a rapid increase. But also at the same time, the people move around at a faster rate than ever. So, for example, Dr. Reese's examinations of the germ cycle and also included deforestation by expanding urban areas. So now we are getting into the stage where the future of the forest is not only dependent on agricultural practices, but also dependent on urban expansions. So we need to really pay attention to people's movement between cities, between urban areas, and more rural areas. And also I keep hearing that people have different opinions about the germ cycles. But then in underlying the debate, I can really see that we all care about the people's need for food and income. So there are debates and there are conflicts, but it's really promising to see that the people all agree on each other's needs and also the reason why we should cooperate. So agricultural transformation from germ to more intensive systems, and those will also have impact on people's income and also availability of the food, and also how people move between urban areas and forest areas. So all of those things are very well connected. But it's so clear that we are now living in the age when there are big changes in most of the list. So farmers are adapting despite lack of access to extension. So I've been always amazed by the innovations that have been made in agriculture. So we are living in the age of smartphones, and we are expecting to have 5G in the near future. So we tended to think about only those artificial intelligence or smartphones as technological advances. But when we actually look at human history, what mattered the most, the greatest technological innovations that mattered most for the humanity were innovations in the agricultural sector. And those innovations are not made by scientists, but made by the farmers who are working in the field. So the farmers these days continue on this history of innovation. So we also need to pay attention to them, and then we also need to provide resources or knowledge that they need. And we also need, before even doing that, we need to really listen to them and see what their needs are and why they need certain things. So they have critical needs for information, education, training, and capacity building programs. And I think they include all of us. This could be the faculties and the professors themselves, because we also need to be informed about the latest changes and latest progresses to properly educate our students. And the students need to be also educated and trained because they need to participate in all of the activities that we have been talking about. And that same applies to government and also applies to the farmers. So how we are going to do that is the big question that we should really work hard on. So this is an exciting time. And there is tremendous opportunity for collaboration in almost all areas between researchers and farmers. So this is a transitional time, as stated in the first release. So when we come to this transition, And this is in a time when we really need updated research most, so that we can properly guide people, because the proper guidance in knowledge at this time, this critical moments, will have a good harvest in many years later. So that's all I have, and I think this discussion, I think it's probably better to put this discussion into later sessions, because there will be discussion on that side. So I'm gonna stop here, and if you have questions, and maybe Dean can help you.
I put in the researchers and development workers. When we try and try to find out information, the researchers, you're providing us the data painstakingly slow. From the government level, they want the answer yesterday. And you want to give us the answer next year. Now we are fixed in between. For example, the shifting cultivation, if you do a Google search, there are more than 1 million hits. And shifting cultivators are doing their shifting cultivation. Researchers are doing research on shifting cultivation, and they don't meet. How do we accelerate the research results? At least give us some interim answers so that we are able to do with our community.
That's a great question. And if any of you have answer to that question, and I see there are more qualified people in this room than me to answer the question. And Paul or Ian, do you have any response to the question?
Well, one thought would be to clearly articulate what questions you want answered, and go to the researcher we need, and that will better inform the research that should be conducted to answer those questions. So that the more articulate you are in asking the question, the easier it will be for the researcher to answer that question. Yeah, I would agree with that too, and I think there's things we can do, as you said, oftentimes in a short-term need, and research takes time. You have to do the research. But also, as you suggested, if you look at chicken cultivation, there's a lot of work that's been done. So we could always start out with a literature review to give some preliminary answers as we wait for the more long-term research. But I think, as Paul said, really what we need is that dialogue between the researchers and the government people. So we know what the government's looking for, and that can help direct our research. Some of the discussions we've had on this stretch so far have been very constructive in that sense, that there is an interest in some greater dialogue and greater work that involves both the government and the research.
I add one more that researchers, are very concerned about making wrong statements, and they also want to be very precise and accurate about their statement. So, the researchers at the same time, I think, need to understand why they need this data, and why, how the reason why they need this data in a short time. So what that means is that I think the researchers can always offer two types of answers. One is very conservative answer, and the other one is more aggressive answer. but with some qualifications on how delicate these things are. So, and then it comes to the responsibility of the government workers, and since they know the situation, they can decide how much risk they can take. But then being able to do that from the risk, from as a researcher means that you actually need a very good command of your subject. Unless you are, if you're shaky about your, when you are doing, then you cannot really provide these two types of answers.
Excuse me. I hope I can be asking a lot of questions. Uh, yes, it is a fact that the states need to work on a lot in collaborating with the government departments and the academic institutions. Because as of now, we see that whenever we visit the universities or the colleges for various programs and interactions and all, there are a lot of researches which are being taken up in the university level as well as in the college level too. There's programs and projects and all. But these are most of the research works which are being undertaken mostly belong to the realm of you can say the applicability of which is a little less in the field. It's more for knowledge gain or whatever you call it, more of a I don't know what you call it, academic purpose. Yeah, that's what. So when it comes to transforming this research experience or the data into the field, into the user agency level, we find it very difficult to implement that because of little use in the government departments or as well as the user agencies like our department or whatever department it is. So there needs to be a lot of more collaboration and efforts on the part of us to get together and to know the needs of the user agencies. That means the department as well as the farmers or whatever needs are there. So in this case, it is also encouraged upon the colleges and the universities to look into areas where you take into research areas. You should also see to it that it can be translated into the field, which can be more of a practical usage that will benefit the state also, not only for the academic purpose. So that is one area which the academia should also keep in mind. And I find that in the US, I think this sort of an interface is very clearly laid out where the user agencies benefits a lot. And we had been an exposure to that to the University of Colorado, where we had been taken to the interface between the farmers and the University of Colorado. So there's a lot of collaboration and exchanges of information and these activities between the user agency and the university, which we find is very, very knowledgeable. And I think our University of Minnesota should also show us the way in how to go about with these projections in our state also. And another thing which I'd like the University of Minnesota to maybe take this into consideration is the forest department has been given the in charge to be the nodal department to look after the climate change activities in the state. And being from the nodal department, the state has, as stated earlier, we are largely agriculture and natural resource-based dependent community. And agriculture being one of the main activity for our food production, food grains production, the timing of the sowing and the reaping, the cultivation, especially at the farmer level, it is more or less fixed. Yearly, there is a certain specific timing for sowing the seed, and all these agricultural activities is time bound for them, which had been practiced over the years. But of late, during the last 1-2 decades or so, there have been some very drastic changes in the weather and climatic pattern also. We depend mostly on the rainfall, the timing of the rainfall, and all this for sowing of the seed, and hence it also determines the productivity at the final stage. And I've seen that over the last 10 years, during the last 10 years, in 1 year, in 2009, there have been a lot of rain, excess rain was there, 2009. And this had drastically reduced the food grain production. And in 2013, there was a drought-like situation. And this also had a lot of impact on the productivity of the food grains, as well as other producers also in the field. So this, at the larger level, at the bigger level, we don't have the means of forecasting the climatic patterns in the next 1 year, 2 years, or in the next few decades or so, which I feel that the university at your level has more potentiality in helping us out so that we can also know about the different changes that are going to come and take place in the next few years or so. So this can act as a knowledge base for the state level policy planners as well as to inform the farmers that these things are going to come, and so that revenues can be taken into account so that it does not affect the productivity of the farming community. So in this sort of a line, if there can be more collaborations at the modeling level of climatic patterns and all, I'm sure you have taken a lot of studies in climate changes and its aspects. So these are areas which I feel that we have a lot of opportunities to work together.
Thanks for the comments.
Just reiterate right there, point number one, what are your research needs? We want to articulate that. We want to ask that question, and tomorrow we have a session to do exactly that. Research needs, and then once we have those, prioritize them, and that will better inform the research that will be done.
I want to supplement another one. It was yesterday our chief secretary to find out whether doomed area is increasing or decreasing. And yesterday it was very interesting that Nusantara have been able to confirm what we have already found out in the rapid semi-structured interview. The northern districts, Mon, Ipile, Longmen, and Quezon, it was increasing. And that was our finding. My appeal to the academicians is, please validate sometimes our finding, which may be quite which may not be really scientifically investigated, but validate our statement at times.
Can you, yeah.
Yeah, so I would like to say a little bit more about art history. So art history is a research institute. Yeah, so our institute is Netherlands Science and Technology Council. It is basically it is a society under the Department of Science and Technology to take up the research study for the state and also to carry out the local specific research to identify the local specific problems and to carry out the research work. So basically, we start working on the natural resources in the year 2004. It is basically for the Kohima district at the village level. Then when we start doing the study, then we realize that we need to do the land resource assessment for the whole state. That is how we send a proposal to the Department of Space, Government of India. Then we start doing the collaboration work where we are the nodal agency or the partner institute to carry out the land use study and to monitor. That is one side, and also to study the land degradation, how it's taking place, and also the water resources. So basically, our objective is to create a baseline data so that the government agency can use the data to move forward for the further policy making level or at the land use planning level. So we start from 2005 and from 2010-11, yeah, we start giving the data to the user department. We provide our data to the government of India. So from there, the plan, so that is how the watershed development plan that is come into being, and also the wasteland management plan that is based on the findings of our data. So the government of India has implemented and they have decided to take up the wasteland. But the wasteland, that is a little bit controversial. I mean, it's a very debatable issue here because the government of India, their classification of the wasteland and the Nagaland wasteland is a little bit different. And when we raise up this issue, they have classified under the wasteland. But actually, those are the shrubland where the fellow land, in the fellow land where there is a secondary regeneration and the density forest canopy is less than 10% and the tree height is less than 3 meters. Those are classified as a shrubland. Wasteland, yes. So those are from the shifting cultivation point of view only. But the actual wasteland, as identified by the government of India, it's a little bit different. So whenever, the department, the user department, when they need the data, we provide to them. But suddenly they came up with the data that we don't have. So during that time, it takes time to generate the data or to go back to the data, redo some research and to provide that. So sometimes it takes time. Yeah, so as of now, the user department are the forest department. They are one of our end user, and the soil and water conservation and the focus project and PHE and the land resource department, 40 and 80. Those are the main user agency of our data.
Those are great because this is great because your data is based on interview with the farmers. Right? But then, yeah, much faster. Yeah, and you also have kind of the data coming from real individual people, and that's to say your data is ultimately coming from the center, right? So I think that there's tremendous opportunity to link this data. So your data, for example, gives us a lot of information about the land use changes, but doesn't show who are behind this, the farmers. But your data, for example, tells about people's decisions and what people are actually doing in the field. But then your data doesn't necessarily say how much area is changing, right? So I think those two could be really good complementary data set that can link both between social aspect and the natural aspect. Yeah. I'm really glad that you talked.
Yeah, again, I just agree with what was just said, but also say that you talked also about, the methodology that would validate your data. If you do these interviews, if you do the methodology right, it's much more reliable when people will listen to it. And I think that's another function of the research institutions. They can help you with that methodology to make sure that it is validated and it's something you can defend as reliable. But I think I want to refer back to the Honorable Minister the first day talking about, I think maybe some other people mentioned this, that what are we going to do beyond this symposium? There's a lot of good discussion, lots of connections here. But as we move ahead tomorrow, it would be important to talk about that and really think about how we can connect the research institutions to the government agencies and think about next steps planning ahead so we can really capture this momentum we're seeing and then put it in practice.
How are we doing on time?
Well, we're over time, but
because I've been on a hot seat. Talking about something right outside of my field. If you have burning comments and questions, I'm gonna regret that I didn't stay.
Well, thank you, King. So that was really a great session. And again, we want to continue this discussion tomorrow. And, yeah, let's thank King. And I think next is lunch, and then the field trip is something that I'll discuss.
Thank you, Dr. Intern, for the conversation. I want to thank the resource persons for time that you've taken, and also I want to thank all the attendees for giving a very patient hearing. We were worried that second day the crowd becomes thinner, third day becomes more thinner, but it's housefull, so I'm so glad you came and gave a very patient hearing. Thank you so much. Now we shall disperse for lunch, but after lunch, we want to track Pulipati. We have arranged about 7 vehicles, but it will not be enough if everyone wants to go out. So I would appreciate if some of you can bring your vehicles along with the 7 vehicles that we have arranged. And for your information, the papers that has been distributed to you just now, please keep it. You will need that for good discussion tomorrow. Thank you so much. Let's disperse for lunch.